So given that we've lamented the disappointments of so many three-year-olds in Europe this season, there are a few pretty good ones in America, don't forget. I can ask Lee Mottershead the question, have Japan got the best three-year-old colt in the world at the moment, and is that him?
Well, the figures would say no. They said no before the Japanese St Leger, and they'll almost certainly say no after the Japanese St Leger, since given that he only just won that race today. But I think you can look at that race and say he's going over 1 mile and 7 furlongs. Imagine one of our top 3 or middle distance horses being put over 1 mile and 7 furlongs. Wouldn't happen apart from the St Leger. He overcame not really staying the trip to win the race. I think if you look back at his Derby effort and his Guineas wins in Japan this year, I think he's a freak of a talent. And although you look down the list of our top three-year-olds in 2020, and as you mentioned America, and obviously horses like Tears the Law and Authentic and Swiss Skydiver, loads of really good horses there. And we've got Palace Pier over here, and we've had Kamiko, and we've got Love. I think Contrail is more talented than all of them. And although, again, he won't be the world's best racehorse this year on the figures, and he won't even be the world's best three-year-old, I think in terms of pure talent, if you look at what he did in his first 2 classic victories, if you look at how good he was as a 2-year-old, I think he's the best 3-year-old in the world. And I'm already looking forward to hopefully seeing him come across to Paris next autumn, and finally righting the wrong of Japan not so far having an ARC winner.
Since the heartbreak of Orfevre, we haven't really had a proper sniff of the Japanese having an ARC winner. And there was that period of time where they really brought the whole event to life with their sheer passion and enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And they, again, Japanese racing, like racing everywhere else, has been hit by having no crowds this year, but they've had some sensationally good racing. They've had a Fillies Triple Crown winner at the same time as a Colts Triple Crown winner in Daring Tact, who went through the Triple Tiara there. They've got some superb horses at the moment, as ever. And because it's Japan, you know that in Contrail there will be zero chance of him going to stud at the end of this year, because that's just not what they do in Japan, thankfully.
Well, that is something I would love to do, go to the races in Japan, as yet an ambition unfulfilled. Let's talk about His Highness the Yaga Khan, who has recruited Johnny Murtagh to his group of trainers. Now, this is significant for more than one reason, as was outlined, I thought, beautifully in your paper by Richard Forrestal earlier in the week.
Yeah, and if I sort of paraphrase what Richard wrote and try and do an excellent column justice, he was making the point that traditionally people with whom the Yaga Khan has severed ties, those ties are not rebound again.
Luca Kumani got a second bite of the cherry, didn't he?
He had a second bite of the cherry. Yeah, it didn't last long. In 2012, Johnny Murtagh's training career was in its early stages, so early in fact that Tommy Carmody held the licence. And there was a race at the Curragh where Johnny, who was at that point the retained jockey to the Yaga Khan, but was injured at the time, in effect, he inverted commas trained a winner at the Curragh, who beat into second a horse owned by the Yaga Khan and trained by John Ock, to whom Johnny was riding. I think it's safe to say the Yaga Khan did not view that with a great deal of satisfaction. The association came to an end, and as you say, with the exception of Luca Kumani, those relationships haven't generally been reformed again. I think it's a mark of how...
Sumio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got back
fair.
in,
Sumio did get back. Yeah, he did get back. But it's a mark of how well Johnny's doing as a trainer, that Yaga Khan has sent him some horses next year. And it's good to see that it's not just in France. Yaga Khan is extremely well represented. Obviously, Michael Halford and Dermot Weld has had tremendous success. It remains a great source of sadness that the Yaga Khan's horses aren't trained in Britain. No horse is trained in Britain. He hasn't gone back with Sir Michael Stout, and he doesn't have horses over here, which is a great shame. But in Ireland and France, he's doing rather well, and I'm sure Johnny Murtagh will do very well indeed for him.
With our fantastic prize money here, it's surely only a matter of time before His Highness sees the light.
Was there an element of satire in that?
No, it was not. It wasn't clever enough to be described as satire.
Okay.
Just rubbish sarcasm, I think. Colin Keane next, who is in a battle with Shane Foley to be the Irish champion. But with one bookmaker this week, he was as short as 6-1 on to be named as a retained rider for Ballydoyle in 2021. Now, we've teased this subject a few times in the last few weeks, but there's something seems a little bit more concrete about it now.
Well, I mean, those of us in this trade greatly enjoy a Paddy Power press release. Sometimes they contain some belting bits and pieces, and this one I thought was particularly interesting. 6-1 on for Colin Keane to be Ballydoyle.
So are they
just
next year stirring the pot, or?
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that Paddy Power have stirred the pot in a press release, but clearly there is smoke out there, and I thought there was a piece this week, I think it was in the Irish Times, in which Ger Lyons was quoted on the subject, and it read like a piece in which the man who currently retains Colin Keane was trying to pour a degree of water on this fire and suggest that this wasn't going to be happening. But at the same time, I think Ger made clear that Colin Keane is not going to go to Ballydoyle without first discussing it with me, first having it agreed with me and my owners. And if he does go, I'll be part of that discussion. There's clearly a momentum between Colin Keane and Ballydoyle. The fact he's getting rides for Aidan O'Brien when he wouldn't have had before. There are people who have pointed out that Ballydoyle job generally lasts for a certain number of years, but not forever.
Ryan Moore's now the longest incumbent in that job, and obviously had the association going back pre-Joseph as well. He was riding classic winners for them in the late noughties. Do you think this is in part potentially COVID inspired, as far as the ease with which you can slide between the two countries is not great?
I think potentially, I mean, we don't know. I think potentially also because of COVID, Ryan Moore has had to spend his year differently this year, in the sense that he spent much more time riding purely in Britain, not going to Ireland, potentially, and I say we don't know, maybe that's been more enjoyable, and maybe the time is just right to try something different. But 6-1 on seems like a remarkably short price when you've still got Ger Lyons to get past.
Yeah, it's an interesting kite being flown, or at least it's an interesting way of expressing the flying of that kite. 48-hour declarations for jumps races appear to be here to stay. Not everyone loves it. I quite do, but I can understand why certain trainers wouldn't, particularly when you get weather like we've had the last couple of days.
I think I would absolutely reflect that position, but I would say I more than quite like 48-hour declarations for jumps. I think it's a really good thing. I think those of us whose job it is to try and sell the sport through the media and try to promote the sport inevitably find it easy to do so when you have fixed fields further out. That's just common sense. I don't think anybody on the opposite side of the debate would argue with that. I think we've seen that 48-hour decks in jump racing already work, in the sense that 1 in every 7 days racing already has 48-hour decks for every race meeting on Sundays. They're always declared on Fridays. A number of major races on Saturdays are already done at 48-hour decks. The Cheltenham Festival has now got a history of 48-hour declarations. And although we've seen in those races, and we've seen this year in 48-hour declarations in jumping in the new COVID world, that there is an increase in non-runners, and you would expect there to be, because there's longer between declarations and racing taking place for a horse to encounter a problem or for the ground to change. Those non-runners have gone up. I think that increase in non-runners is a price worth paying. I absolutely understand and sympathise with trainers that it does make their job harder, but equally I'm encouraged to see that in general trainers, although they might not be happy about this, they're understanding of it. And I think some trainers are making the point that they actually quite like it. It gives them a greater ease with jockeys, in the sense that they know their situation much further out, and for their owners it can be helpful too, because owners know 2 days before a race if their horse is going to be racing and where their horse is going to be racing. So I think although there are issues with 48-hour decks that mean they will not be loved by everybody, I think for the greater good, and remembering that racing is an entertainment business, those who we want to entertain enjoy knowing fields further out, and therefore 48-hour decks for jumps, as for flat racing, must stay.
One horse who's done more to entertain than almost any other over the last few years is the dual Grand National hero Tiger Roll. He made his return to the track in a flat race at Navan earlier this week in the Flower Hill Maiden over 1.6 miles. He was ridden by a 16-year-old jockey, a jockey only 6 years older than the horse himself. Quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And the race for Tiger Roll started quite a while after everybody else's race started. He was very slow out the gates, which maybe you would have expected on this different sort of experience for him, but he ran a perfectly sound race in a contest of that nature. It was merely a means to an end. I think what's interesting is the debate about what his end actually is, in the sense that Gordon Elliott and the owners keep saying that his primary objective this season is the cross-country chase at the Cheltenham Festival. I cannot believe that Tiger Roll's prime aim is not trying to emulate Red Rum by winning a third Grand National.
Well, people's priorities have changed. I'm the biggest devotee of the Grand National that there is, but any race at the Cheltenham Festival now seems to have acquired a significance. But let's put it out there. If Easy's Land turns up at the Cheltenham Festival in the cross-country race, Tiger Roll might as well start now.
Yeah, certainly if Easy's Land performs to the level he performed at last season in the cross-country chase, you would absolutely say that. Although we shouldn't forget that in the previous season's cross-country chase, Tiger Roll produced an almost Gold Cup-like figure.
He did.
In winning that race. The last two cross-country chases have produced two of the very best conditions chase figures of the last two seasons. But you're right, Easy's Land looked a sensational horse for that discipline this season. Interesting that he's also being aimed towards the Grand National. But you sense that again this season, if we have a season that reaches the Grand National, and we all have to hope we do, that a little bit as with Enable this year on the flat, the narrative of the season, even though the Cheltenham Festival dominates everything in this sport, the overarching narrative, certainly for the general public, will be, can Tiger Roll emulate Red Rum? And let's hope he gets there to Aintree on that Saturday in April and at least has his chance.
Now this jockey's title between Sheen Murphy and William Buick, is it really a battle or is this a bit of a phony war?
Listen, in the media we obviously love to build up these jockeys' titles, and I think it's fair to build it up in the sense that yes, there are only 2 weeks to go, and I think is it 9 winners between them.
So he's chiseling away at the block, but it's not coming apart that quickly.
It's not coming apart, but you can overturn a 9-winner deficit in 2 weeks. William Buick's agent this year has been Tony Hind, who has a record of making champion jockeys. His quotes in the Racing Post this week, as similar to his quotes during the previous months, have shown how absolutely hungry he is to win this title with William Buick. I'm sure William is every bit as hungry. We're going into a period whereby Sheen Murphy perhaps won't be able to ride in Britain every day. He's got the Breeders' Cup coming up, hasn't he, where you'd imagine he'll be...
Well, he'll have to go to the Breeders' Cup
he'll
to
be in
ride
America for Cameco. William Buick, we're talking earlier on, will William be at the Breeders' Cup? No, me neither. And if he has a chance of winning a Jockey's Championship, perhaps that might well keep him at home anyway. It just adds an extra element of spice these final 2 weeks of the season. And I think it does show that where in a normal year the Jockey's Championship ends on Champions Day, the final few weeks of the season can sometimes lack a narrative and a raison d'etre if you have a Jockey's Championship battle. For all that there are many arguments for having the jockey season end on Champions Day, where it goes on to November Handicap Day at Donny, it does give those final few weeks a raison d'etre if you have a battle for the title. And although at the minute it's a battle in inverted commas, I think if you said to to William Buick and Sheen Murphy and to Tony Hind, is it a battle? They still say it is.
Now, we were asking, I tossed the question out there last week because people are wondering what's happened to this B sample of Sheen Murphy's for his failed drugs test. And I've been in touch with France Gallo this morning and I got a message back saying, We understand your legitimate wish to know where we stand on this sensitive matter. The process is running its course as it normally would do. There is nothing unusual, but France Gallo do not make public announcements on this until the authorities in charge have made a decision. Therefore, France Gallo cannot disclose at what stage of the process they are at the moment. They would say that it's only because Sheen Murphy decided to announce that he was testing positive that the news is now public. In the normal course of events, it would have been.
It's really interesting. We'll clearly find out in due course what the situation is. I think one aspect of all this...
The one thing I got out of that was that there hasn't been some sort of bizarre artificial delay or anything like that.
It's running its course.
It's running its normal course.
I think one aspect, given where we are in the year and what Sheen Murphy would normally be looking to do at this time of year, i.e. head to Japan, is that the JRA is notoriously not the right word, quite rightly scrupulous in terms of who it lets into the country.
So if you fail the test, you might struggle.
I think Sheen Murphy's future in Japan, where he's so popular and so successful, could well in the near future depend on what happens with this test.
On how that unravels.
Yeah.
Okay. Betting shop closures now affect every city, town and borough that fall into Tier 3, and of course Wales, which is in the middle of their fire break situation, their quasi-lockdown.
Yeah.
So how much will this really affect the betting and racing industries?
We're looking at quite big numbers now. If you take into account Liverpool, Manchester, South Yorkshire, Lancashire, as you say, Wales, you do the numbers and you're looking at around 23% of Britain's retail estate is currently involved in forced closures. For those betting shops, for turnover, and more importantly for the staff in those betting shops, that clearly raises questions. And I think it raises wider questions in the debate around should these shops be closed. There are clearly enormous debates about the rights and wrongs of government policy. But government policy is generally full of inconsistencies. And I think those who represent betting shops and also British horse racing and Irish racing would make the point that it does seem strange that you can go in any number of non-essential shops at the moment of a similar size to a betting shop, whereas you can't go in a betting shop, given betting shops have shown over recent weeks how well they can manage this situation.
I just wanted to touch on a related point, which is that the point-to-point meeting today, which has gone ahead with great cooperation between various local authorities, the BHA, the Point-to-Point Organising Committee, has at the 11th hour withdrawn permission for owners to attend Maysmore Park in Gloucestershire because of an intervention from the local authority.
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether increasingly, as more power is devolved to local authorities and local government, whether racing is going to have its work cut out trying to overcome those stumbling blocks.
And we saw that, didn't we, in the build-up to the St Leger Festival, in terms of the influence that the local authority, and particularly the mayor there, was having in whether that meeting should or should not have taken place with crowds.
And there is also an edict that specified that nobody, whatever participation they had in this point-to-point from a Tier 2 or Tier 3 area, was able to attend. So the tier system is not going to make life any less complicated, that's for sure. Those were this week's talking points. Well, that just leaves me to thank Lee Mottershead for your company today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Pleasure, as always.
And we will see you next when on a racecourse?
Well, I'm actually currently on a leave period, so I'm going to spend most of the next 10 days or so looking forward to the Melbourne Cup, my favourite flat race in the whole calendar.
Okay, so just prowling the house with your skipping rope on the patio,
with the skipping rope,
trying to get that sorted out.
Yeah, bit of baking, bit of cooking. Bit of skipping, as you say, and a bit of counting down towards the Melbourne Cup.
Looking forward to the Melbourne Cup and seeing what the Australian vets can chuck out between now and then. Yeah?
Again, satire.
That's again, not good enough to be satire. After the break, I'm very pleased to say that I will be joined by one of the country's most recognisable actors who will also be directing what could turn out to be one of the most important films made on the subject of horse racing. Robert Bathurst will be in a few moments' time. Subscribe to Racing TV to be notified when more Luck on Sunday videos are appearing online. And don't forget to join me for the show every Sunday morning from 9 o'clock with the best guests.